Aliens summoned heroes, but humanity sent Deathworlders and their engines of war. The Valdari High Council chamber thrummed with desperate energy as Ambassador Zephyra activated the ancient summoning protocols. Her crystalline fingers danced across holographic interfaces that hadn't been used in over 1,000 cycles. The other council members watched with mixture of hope and terror as the massive portal generator hummed to life in the center of their most sacred space. "Are we certain this is wise?" whispered Counselor Thex. His reptilian features creased with worry. "The old texts speak of heroes, yes, but they also warn of consequences." Zephyra's luminescent eyes never left the swirling energy building within the portal frame. "The Crex Imperium advances on 17 fronts. Our defensive lines collapse daily. We have no choice but to call upon the ancient pacts." She paused, her voice becoming reverent. "The Terrans answered our distress beacon. They agreed to send their champions through the gateway." The portal stabilized with a sound like thunder, its surface rippling with otherworldly energy. Through the dimensional tear, they could see movement on the other side. The council held their collective breath as shapes began to emerge from the swirling vortex. What stepped through was not what they expected. The first figure was massive, easily 7 feet tall and encased in what appeared to be mechanized armor that moved with fluid precision. Behind the reflective visor, they caught glimpses of scarred flesh and cold, calculating eyes. The armor itself was a masterwork of engineering, bristling with weapon systems and sensor arrays that immediately began scanning the chamber. "Contact!" the figure spoke, its voice artificially amplified and distorted by the suit's systems. "Hostile environment detected. Atmospheric composition nominal for human survival. Gravitational variance within acceptable parameters." The being turned its helmeted head toward the council. "I am Sergeant Marcus Chen, 3rd Expeditionary Force, Terran Colonial Marines. We are not your heroes." More figures emerged from the portal. Each wore similar mechanized suits, though their configurations varied. Some carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Others bore equipment whose purpose the Valdari couldn't begin to guess. Their movements were coordinated, professional, and utterly without mercy. Zephyra stepped forward, her diplomatic training overriding her growing unease. "Welcome, champions of Terra. We are the Valdari Collective, and we have summoned you in our darkest hour to aid us against—" "Ma'am," Chen interrupted, holding up one gauntleted hand. "With respect, we weren't summoned. We volunteered." He gestured to his squad, who had efficiently secured the chamber's exits without the Valdari even noticing. "Command received your distress signal approximately 72 hours ago. After analysis of your tactical situation and enemy capabilities, we deployed through your gateway." Another human stepped forward, smaller than Chen, but radiating an aura of controlled violence that made even the peaceful Valdari nervous. "Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez, Special Operations. We've been monitoring Crex communications since we arrived in your local space. They're not just conquering your worlds, they're strip-mining entire systems and enslaving populations." Her helmet retracted, revealing a face marked by countless battles and eyes that held no warmth. "That doesn't sit well with us." Counselor Thex found his voice. "But surely you are heroes, as the ancient texts promised. You've come to save us from the darkness?" The humans exchanged glances, and Zephyra caught what might have been amusement in their body language. Chen's helmet also retracted, showing a face that belonged on a predator, all sharp angles and scars. "Counselor, we're not heroes. We're soldiers from a world you couldn't survive for 5 minutes. We're what crawled out of Earth's gravity well after 10,000 years of evolution on a planet that tries to kill everything on it daily." Rodriguez activated a holographic display from her suit's systems. "Your sun classification indicates you're from a garden world. Low gravity, stable climate, minimal geological activity. Your people evolved in paradise. The display shifted to show Earth's statistics. This is where we come from. Gravity that would crush your bones, weather systems that level cities, predators that consider us prey, volcanic activity that blocks out suns, ice ages that last millennia. We're not heroes, Chen continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. We're Deathworlders, and we brought our engines of war. As if summoned by his words, the portal flared again. What emerged this time made the Valdari Council step back in unified terror. It was a machine, but unlike anything in their experience. Where Valdari technology was elegant and smooth, this was brutal functionality given form. Weapons bristled from every surface. Armor plating showed the scars of countless battles, and the very air around it seemed to vibrate with barely contained violence. Autonomous war platform designation Reaper 7, Rodriguez explained casually as the machine's sensors swept the chamber. It followed us through the gateway, along with approximately 12,000 other units currently establishing a forward operations base on your moon. Zephyra felt her legs threaten to give out. 12,000? That's just the advance force, Chen said, checking readings on his suit's display. The main fleet arrives in 18 hours. 3 battle groups, full expeditionary force, and enough firepower to sterilize this entire system if necessary. He looked up at the stunned council. But we didn't come here to destroy your enemies. We came here to teach you how to destroy them yourselves. The implications hit the Valdari like a physical blow. They had called for heroes to save them, expecting shining champions who would drive back the darkness through noble sacrifice and pure hearts. Instead, they had summoned beings who considered warfare an art form, who came from a world so hostile that merely surviving on it had forged them into living weapons. The Krex Imperium has been expanding unopposed for 3 centuries, Rodriguez said, her tone clinical. They're used to fighting civilizations that developed in peaceful environments, beings who see war as an aberration, a tragedy to be ended as quickly as possible. Her smile was sharp enough to cut steel. They've never fought anyone who was born for it. Chen activated his own holographic display, showing tactical data that made the Valdari's most advanced warfare simulations look like children's games. We've been observing their fleet movements, analyzing their weapon signatures, studying their tactical doctrine. They're predictable because they've never faced real opposition. He gestured to the data. In human terms, they're bullies who've never met someone willing to fight back. But we are willing to fight back, Thex protested weakly. Our defense forces are designed to protect, not to wage war, Chen cut him off. There's a difference. Protection is reactive. War is creative. You build shields and hope they hold. We build weapons and make sure the other side never gets close enough to test our defenses. The autonomous war platform suddenly spoke, its voice a mechanical approximation of human speech that somehow managed to convey amusement. Query: shall I demonstrate standard Terran defensive protocols? Local hostile fleet detected at system edge. Rodriguez checked her display. Krex Patrol Group, 6 ships, standard configuration. They're probably investigating the portal activation. She looked at Zephyra. This is your space. How do you usually handle incursions? We attempt to negotiate first. If that fails, we evacuate civilian populations and fall back to more defensible positions, Zephyra answered, her voice barely above a whisper. Reaper 7, initiate diplomatic contact, Chen ordered. Clarification required. Standard Terran diplomatic protocols. Affirmative. The machine's weapon systems powered up with a sound like approaching doom. Message transmitted. This system is under Terran protection. You have 30 seconds to reverse course or be destroyed. This is your only warning. The Valdari Council watched in stunned silence as their sensor readings showed the Krex fleet immediately altering course away from the system at maximum speed. Not a single shot had been fired. But the mere presence of the human war machine had accomplished what their finest diplomats and strongest defensive fleets could never achieve. "That's impossible," Counselor Thex breathed. "The Kreks fear nothing. They've conquered 100 worlds. They've conquered 100 worlds full of people who had never learned to be properly terrifying," Rodriguez corrected. The message Reaper 7 sent included a full tactical analysis of their fleet composition, detailed schematics of their weapon systems, and precise calculations of how long it would take us to reduce their ships to component atoms. She smiled that predatory smile again. It also included a brief overview of what happened to the last empire that tried to expand into Terran space. Chen pulled up another holographic display, this one showing the skeletal remains of massive space stations drifting in an asteroid field. "The Zephyrian hegemony. They demanded tribute from human colonies. We sent them our response in the form of a battle fleet that turned their entire home system into a debris field. That was 20 years ago. Word gets around." Zephyra realized with growing horror that they hadn't summoned heroes at all. They had called upon something far more dangerous, an entire species that had weaponized evolution itself. What do you want from us?" "Want?" Chen seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. "We don't want anything. You sent a distress call. We answered it. That's what civilized beings do." He paused, considering his words. "But if you're asking what we intend to do, the answer is simple. We're going to end the Kreks Imperium as a threat to innocent life. Permanently." "And then?" Thex asked. Rodriguez shrugged. "Then we go home. Unlike the Kreks, we don't build empires. We don't need to control other worlds to feel secure. We just make sure that anyone who threatens innocent life learns why that's a bad idea." The portal flared once more, and additional humans began emerging. These carried different equipment. Some looked like engineers, others like scientists, and still others like beings whose purpose the Valdari couldn't even guess. But all of them moved with the same predatory confidence, the same absolute certainty that they were the most dangerous things in any room they entered. "The real question," Chen said, watching his people deploy throughout the chamber with military precision, "is what you want to be when this is over. Do you want to remain victims, hoping that the next threat will be stopped by someone else? Or do you want to learn how to make sure there is no next threat?" As if in response to his words, alarms began sounding throughout the Valdari facility. Their defense networks had detected massive energy signatures appearing throughout their star system. The human fleet had arrived ahead of schedule, and the sensors couldn't even count how many ships were translating into normal space. Zephyra stared at the tactical display in complete bewilderment. Each human vessel was easily 10 times the size of the largest Valdari ship, and there were hundreds of them. The energy readings coming from their weapon systems were beyond anything their civilization had ever imagined possible. "How?" was all she could manage to say. Chen followed her gaze to the display and seemed to understand her question. "You asked for help against an enemy that was destroying innocent life. In human terms, that makes them monsters, and we've had millions of years of practice killing monsters." He turned to face the council directly. "The Kreks Imperium chose to be monsters. Now they get to learn what humans do to monsters." The war machine awakens. Admiral Kextar had ruled the Kreks Imperium's 4th Fleet for over 2 centuries, and in all that time he had never retreated from battle. His massive form dominated the bridge of the dreadnought Inevitable Conquest, 8 feet of scaled muscle and predatory cunning that had subjugated dozens of star systems. The Valdari were supposed to be his latest victims, their peaceful worlds ripe for harvesting. Instead, he found himself staring at sensor readings that defied all logic. "Report," he growled, his voice carrying the authority of countless victories. Fleet Commander Vexhai, his most trusted subordinate, approached with obvious reluctance. "Admiral, our patrol group at the Valdari system has withdrawn. They report unusual developments." Define unusual. Vexhai activated the tactical display, showing the Valdari system with new signatures scattered throughout it. "Unknown vessels have appeared throughout the system. Energy readings are—" He paused, rechecking his data. "Admiral, they're showing power outputs that exceed our theoretical maximums." Kextar studied the display with growing interest rather than concern. In his experience, most species used sensor phantoms and false readings to make themselves appear more dangerous than they actually were. "Projection attempts. The Valdari are trying to discourage our advance." He turned to his tactical officer. "How long until we can bring the full fleet to bear on their homeworld?" "Sir, there's more," Vexhai continued. "We intercepted a communication from the unknown vessels. They identified themselves as Terran." The bridge fell silent. Every Krex warrior present knew that name, though most considered it legend. Tales of the Deathworld species that had emerged from the galactic rim, bringing technologies that bordered on the impossible and a willingness to wage war that exceeded even Krex standards. "Impossible," Kextar said finally. "Terra is theoretical. No species could evolve under those conditions." "That's what our xenobiologists said," Vexhai replied. "Until now." The tactical display suddenly flared with new contacts. Ships were translating into normal space at the edge of the Krex fleet's position, massive vessels that dwarfed even Imperial dreadnoughts. Their formations were unlike anything in Krex tactical doctrine, spread across multiple dimensions in patterns that suggested they could engage threats from any vector simultaneously. "How many?" Kextar demanded. "Sensors detect approximately 400 vessels, Admiral. Energy signatures indicate—" "Admiral, each of those ships appears to be more heavily armed than our flagship." Kextar felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: uncertainty. But he was still Krex, still a predator at the apex of galactic civilization. "They may have numbers and firepower, but they lack our experience. We have conquered worlds while these humans were still theoretical." He straightened to his full height. "Signal the fleet. We advance on the Valdari system. If these Terrans want war, they'll learn why the Krex Imperium has never been defeated." The human response was immediate and devastating. Aboard the Terran battleship Righteous Fury, Captain Elena Vasquez watched the Krex fleet's approach with the detached interest of a scientist observing predictable behavior. Her bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, no wasted motion or dramatic declarations. They had done this before. "Krex fleet maintaining attack formation," reported her tactical officer. "Standard Imperial doctrine. They're treating us like every other species they've encountered." "Mistake number 1, Vasquez said quietly. "Communications. Have you finished analyzing their command structure?" "Yes, Captain." "We've identified the flagship and mapped their communication protocols. Also intercepted their tactical database. Their encryption was laughably primitive." "Good. Weapons. I want a demonstration that will save lives on both sides. Target the lead destroyer with a precision strike. Remove its main weapon array, but leave the crew compartments intact." "Aye, Captain. Focusing particle beam array." The weapon fired once, a lance of energy so precisely controlled that it carved through the Krex destroyer's armored hull like a surgical scalpel. The ship's massive forward cannon array simply ceased to exist, vaporized at the molecular level, while the rest of the vessel remained completely undamaged. Aboard the inevitable Conquest, alarms shrieked as sensors registered the impossible precision of the attack. The targeted destroyer was still functional, its crew still alive, but its primary weapons had been surgically removed by a force they couldn't even classify. "Return fire!" Kextar roared. "All vessels, target the lead human ship!" What followed was a masterclass in the difference between warfare as the Kreks understood it and warfare as humans practiced it. The Kreks fleet opened fire with every weapon they possessed, energy beams and projectiles creating a storm of destruction that should have obliterated any target. The human ships simply weren't there. They moved like ghosts, their trajectories impossible to predict, their defensive systems turning aside attacks that should have been overwhelming. Worse, their return fire was surgical in its precision. Kreks vessels found their weapon systems disabled, their engines knocked offline, their communication arrays reduced to scrap. But their life support and crew quarters remained untouched. "They're not trying to kill us," Vexhai realized with growing horror. "They're making a point." The human fleet's maneuvers were hypnotic in their coordination. Ships that massed millions of tons danced around Krek's fire with grace that defied physics, their formations flowing like liquid while maintaining perfect tactical positioning. It was warfare elevated to art form, and the Kreks were being schooled by masters of the craft. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." On screen, Captain Vasquez appeared in the hologram, her uniform crisp, her expression professionally neutral. Behind her, the bridge of her vessel hummed with quiet efficiency. "Admiral Kextar, I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the Terran Colonial Navy. I'm contacting you to offer terms for your withdrawal from this system." Kextar's pride flared. "You dare offer terms to the Kreks Imperium? We have never surrendered to—" "Admiral," Vasquez interrupted, her voice carrying absolute authority, "you've just witnessed a demonstration of our basic defensive capabilities. Your fleet has been completely neutralized without a single casualty on either side. I'm offering you the chance to withdraw with honor intact. Our weapons are temporarily disabled. Our combat engineers can restore them if you agree to our terms." Vasquez leaned forward slightly. "But I need you to understand something fundamental about this situation. You're not fighting the Valdari anymore. You're fighting us. And we don't lose." The display behind her shifted to show tactical data that made Kextar's blood run cold. The human ships weren't even operating at full capacity. The weapons that had just neutralized his entire fleet were listed as point defense systems. Their actual armaments remained powered down. "This is a demonstration," Vasquez continued. "We could have destroyed your entire fleet in the opening salvo. Instead, we're showing you what happens when someone who evolved for warfare meets someone who simply learned to fight." She paused, letting that sink in. "The Kreks Imperium has been very successful against species that see war as an aberration. You've never faced a species that sees it as a natural state." Aboard the Valdari monitoring station, Ambassador Zephyra watched the battle with growing comprehension of what they had actually summoned. The humans weren't just superior tactically, they were operating on a completely different level of strategic thinking. Where the Kreks sought to conquer through overwhelming force, the humans were conducting a lesson in applied violence. "They're not even angry," she whispered to Counselor Thex. "They're treating this entire engagement like a training exercise." On the human flagship, Sergeant Chen stood beside Captain Vasquez, his powered armor interfaces directly linked to the ship's tactical systems. "Captain, I'm reading massive Kreks reinforcements en route. 3 full battle groups, approximately 1,500 vessels." "Expected," Vasquez replied calmly. "Admiral Kextar, I assume you've called for reinforcements?" Kextar's surprise was visible even through the hologram. "How could you possibly—" "We've been monitoring your communications since we arrived. Your reinforcement fleet will arrive in approximately 4 hours." Vasquez checked her displays. "That gives us time to finish this conversation properly." The tactical display shifted again, and Kextar found himself looking at a real-time view of human fleet dispositions throughout known space. There were thousands of ships, spread across dozens of systems, all moving with coordinated purpose. "You're looking at the current deployment of human naval forces," Vasquez explained. Each of those fleets is significantly larger than what you're facing here. And this is just our expeditionary force. The ships we keep deployed outside human space for situations exactly like this one. Kextar realized with growing dread that they weren't facing a single species defending itself. They were facing a military machine that spanned star systems with capabilities that dwarfed anything the Imperium could deploy. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice hollow. "The immediate cessation of hostilities against all civilian populations," Vasquez replied. "The return of all enslaved beings to their homeworlds, reparations for damages caused to peaceful civilizations, and a formal treaty recognizing the basic rights of sentient beings." "And if we refuse?" Vasquez's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes grew colder. "Then we stop being polite." As if summoned by her words, new contacts appeared on the sensors. Human ships were translating into normal space around the entire Krex fleet, surrounding them in a three-dimensional formation that offered no escape route. But these weren't the sleek warships they had been fighting. These were vessels that looked like they had been designed by engineers who had given up any pretense of elegance in favor of pure, brutal functionality. "Admiral," Vexhai reported, his voice shaking, "we're detecting weapon signatures that—" "Admiral, they're charging weapons that read as planet killers." "Demonstration over," Chen commented, his enhanced voice carrying throughout the Krex bridge through their communication link. "Those are actual warships. What you fought before were escort vessels." Kextar stared at the tactical display, finally understanding the true scope of what they faced. The humans hadn't been fighting them at all. They had been conducting a carefully controlled exercise in applied diplomacy, using just enough force to make their point while keeping casualties to zero. "You're not warriors," he said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "You're something else entirely." "We're humans," Vasquez replied simply. "We're what evolution produces when warfare becomes a survival trait. You've been fighting species that developed in peaceful environments. We developed on a world that spent millions of years trying to kill us, so we learned to kill back." She leaned forward again. "Every human child learns basic tactics before they learn to read. Every human citizen completes military training. Every human world maintains a defense force that could conquer most star systems single-handedly." The implications crashed over Kextar like a tidal wave. The Krex Imperium had built its power on the assumption that they were the apex predators of the galaxy. But they had never encountered true predators, beings for whom violence was not a tool of conquest, but a fundamental aspect of existence. "You have 1 hour to respond to our terms," Vasquez continued. "If you agree, we'll escort you to a neutral system where formal negotiations can begin. If you refuse—" She gestured to the tactical display showing human fleet positions. "Well, the Zephyrian hegemony refused our terms as well. You're welcome to inspect the debris field that used to be their home system." The communication ended, leaving the Krex bridge in stunned silence. They weren't just outgunned. They were facing a species that had evolved beyond their understanding of warfare itself. Where the Krex conquered through strength, humans conquered through absolute overwhelming superiority in every aspect of military science. Kextar looked at his fleet, disabled and surrounded, then at the reinforcements racing toward what they thought was a rescue operation, but was actually a potential massacre. For the first time in centuries, he was forced to confront the possibility that the Krex Imperium might not be the dominant force in the galaxy after all. When monsters meet their match. 3 hours after the surrender of Admiral Kextar's fleet, the Krex reinforcement armada dropped out of hyperspace expecting to find the wreckage of human ships and the beginning of another glorious conquest. Instead, They found their colleagues floating helpless in space, surrounded by human vessels that seemed to have materialized from nightmare. Supreme Admiral Zarthek commanded the largest fleet the Krex Imperium had assembled in a generation. 1,500 ships spread across multiple battle groups, carrying enough firepower to reduce inhabited worlds to cosmic dust. He had never lost a battle, never retreated from an enemy, never even considered the possibility of defeat. "What happened here?" he demanded, his voice echoing across the command bridge of the super dreadnought Imperial Wrath. Fleet Commander Vekros pulled up the sensor readings, his scaled hands trembling slightly. "Supreme Admiral, Admiral Kextar's entire fleet has been neutralized. No casualties reported, but all vessels show complete weapons failure. They're surrounded by unknown ships that match no configuration in our database." Zarthek studied the tactical display with growing rage. The Krex way was simple: overwhelming force applied without mercy until the enemy was destroyed. The concept of disabling an entire fleet without killing anyone was not just alien to him, it was insulting. "Hail Admiral Kextar," he ordered. The hologram of his subordinate appeared, and Zarthek felt a chill at what he saw. Kextar, the most feared warrior in the Fourth Fleet, looked defeated. Not physically harmed, but something fundamental had been broken inside him. "Report, Admiral." "Supreme Admiral," Kextar's voice was hollow, "we are facing an enemy unlike anything in our experience. They call themselves humans, and they—" He paused, struggling for words. "They war like the ancient gods. Our entire tactical doctrine is meaningless against them. Elaborate. They disabled our entire fleet in 17 minutes, 0 casualties on either side. Their precision is absolute. Their technology is incomprehensible, and their strategic thinking operates on levels we cannot match." Kextar looked directly at his superior. "Supreme Admiral, we are not the apex predators we believed ourselves to be." Before Zarthek could respond, new contacts appeared on the sensors. Human ships were translating into normal space around his fleet, but these were different from the sleek vessels that had captured Kextar's forces. These were massive, angular constructions that looked like they had been designed by engineers who understood that sometimes subtlety was less important than the ability to destroy entire solar systems. "Supreme Admiral," the tactical officer reported, his voice tight with fear. "We're being hailed by the human fleet." The holographic display activated, showing a human female in a crisp military uniform. Her bearing was professional, but her eyes held depths that suggested she had seen things that would break lesser minds. Behind her, the bridge of her vessel hummed with quiet efficiency that spoke of absolute confidence. "Supreme Admiral Zarthek," the human said, "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Navy. I believe you're here to reinforce Admiral Kextar's fleet." "I am here to complete the conquest of this system," Zarthek replied, his voice carrying all the authority of centuries of victory. "Stand down immediately, or face the full might of the Krex Imperium." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but something in the background of her bridge shifted. Crew members moved with sudden purpose, and displays began showing weapon systems coming online. "Admiral, before this escalates further, I'd like to show you something." The tactical display shifted to show a star system Zarthek recognized, the former capital of the Zephyrian hegemony, a rival empire that had challenged human expansion 20 years earlier. What he saw made his blood run cold. Where there had once been inhabited worlds, there was only debris. Not the scattered wreckage of planetary bombardment, but the complete atomization of entire planets. The system's star had been artificially destabilized, and what remained was a slowly expanding nebula of superheated plasma and metallic vapor. The Zephyrian hegemony demanded tribute from human colonies, Chen explained, her voice clinically neutral. When we refused, they threatened to exterminate every human settlement in 3 sectors. This was our response. Zarthek stared at the images, his mind struggling to process the implications. An entire star system, reduced to component atoms, not conquered, not occupied, erased from existence with surgical precision. "You're claiming responsibility for stellar engineering?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're claiming responsibility for ending a threat to innocent life," Chen corrected. "The Zephyrians had enslaved 47 species and strip-mined over 200 inhabited worlds. When they threatened to expand that to human space, we removed them from the equation." The display shifted again, showing tactical analyses that made Zarthek's most advanced strategic computers look like children's toys. Human fleet movements across known space, defensive positions that spanned multiple star systems, and weapon signatures that defied everything the Kreks understood about the physical limits of technology. "This is what you're facing," Chen continued. "Not a single species defending its territory, but a civilization that has evolved warfare into something approaching perfection. We don't fight wars the way you do. We don't seek to conquer and subjugate. We identify threats to innocent life and eliminate them with extreme prejudice." Aboard the Valdari monitoring station, Ambassador Zephyra watched the exchange with growing understanding of the true scope of what they had summoned. The humans weren't just militarily superior, they operated on a completely different philosophical level. Where the Kreks saw warfare as a tool of expansion, humans saw it as a necessary function of civilization itself. "They're not warriors," she whispered to Counselor Thex. "They're gardeners. They tend the galaxy by removing the things that would harm it." Chen's voice continued, cutting through Zarthek's growing dread. "Your Imperium has been very successful against species that see war as an aberration to be ended as quickly as possible. You've enslaved civilizations that developed in peaceful environments, beings who never learned to fight back effectively." She paused, her eyes meeting his directly through the hologram. "But we didn't develop in a peaceful environment. We developed on a world that spent millions of years trying to kill everything that lived on it." The tactical display shifted to show Earth itself, and Zarthek found himself staring at environmental readings that defied belief. Gravitational forces that would crush Krek's bones, weather systems that regularly generated energies equivalent to planetary bombardment, geological activity that reshaped continents, and life forms that had evolved to be predators of predators. "This is our homeworld," Chen explained. "Everything that lives there either learns to kill or becomes food for something that did. Our entire species developed under selective pressure that would eliminate most sapient races within a generation." Zarthek realized with growing horror that the humans weren't just technologically superior. They were evolutionarily designed for warfare, shaped by millions of years of surviving on a world that would be classified as uninhabitable by any civilized standard. "What do you want?" he asked, the question torn from him by the reality of what he faced. "The immediate cessation of all hostile activities against civilian populations, the liberation of all enslaved species, reparations for the worlds you've destroyed, and a formal treaty recognizing the basic rights of sapient beings throughout this sector. And if we refuse?" Chen's expression didn't change. But the displays around her showed human fleet positions throughout local space. Thousands of vessels, each more heavily armed than anything in the Krek's arsenal, all moving with coordinated purpose toward Imperium space. "Then we stop treating this as a police action and start treating it as pest control." The bridge of the Imperial wrath fell silent as the implications sank in. The Kreks had built their empire on the assumption that they were the most dangerous force in the galaxy. But they were facing beings who had been forged in fires that would have destroyed Krek's civilization before it began. "You're not even angry at us," Zarthek realized suddenly. "This isn't personal." "No," Chen agreed. "You're a problem to be solved, like a disease that needs to be cured or a natural disaster that needs to be contained." "We don't hate diseases. We just eliminate them before they can cause more harm. Sergeant Rodriguez appeared beside Chen, her powered armor scarred from countless battles. Supreme Admiral, we've been monitoring Krek's fleet movements throughout the sector. Your Imperium has 47 separate battle groups moving toward this system. We've already positioned forces to intercept all of them. Impossible, Zarthek breathed. We have over 20,000 vessels in this sector alone, and we have enough firepower to sterilize every system they're deployed in, Rodriguez replied matter-of-factly. But we'd prefer not to. Destruction is wasteful. We'd rather teach you why threatening innocent life is a bad idea and then let you make better choices. The display showed real-time positions of human and Krek's forces throughout local space. Every Krek's fleet was surrounded, outnumbered, and outgunned by margins that made resistance seem not just futile, but suicidal. How long have you been planning this? Zarthek asked. Since we received the Valdari distress signal 72 hours ago, Chen replied. Once we analyzed the tactical situation and confirmed that the Krek's Imperium was engaged in systematic slavery and genocide, we began deploying assets for complete sector pacification. The scope of it hit Zarthek like a physical blow. In less than 3 days, the humans had positioned forces to neutralize an empire that had taken the Krek's centuries to build. They hadn't just responded to a crisis. They had orchestrated the complete elimination of a galactic threat with surgical precision. You're offering us surrender, he said, the words bitter in his mouth. We're offering you evolution, Chen corrected. The choice between becoming something better or being removed as a threat to innocent life. The Kreks have the potential to be productive members of galactic civilization. You're intelligent, you're resourceful, and you have organizational abilities that could benefit everyone. She paused. But that potential is wasted as long as you continue to see other species as prey. The communication display shifted to show a planet Zarthek recognized, the Krek's homeworld itself. Human ships were visible in orbit, their weapons trained on strategic targets throughout the system, not threatening bombardment, but demonstrating complete tactical control. This isn't conquest, Zarthek realized with dawning comprehension. You're not trying to destroy us. You're trying to domesticate us. We're trying to civilize you, Chen replied. The same way our ancestors were civilized when they learned that cooperation produces better outcomes than predation. You have 1 hour to respond to our terms. Every Krek's fleet in this sector will make the same choice simultaneously. The holographic display showed countdown timers appearing over every Krek's fleet position. Synchronized ultimatums delivered to every commander simultaneously, coordinated across light years of space with precision that demonstrated strategic capabilities beyond Krek's comprehension. Aboard the Valdari station, Counselor Thex turned to Zephyra with something approaching awe. They're not just ending the war. They're redefining what war means. On the human flagship, Admiral Chen turned to Sergeant Rodriguez. Status report on Operation Garden Tending. All Krek's fleets have received ultimatums. Colonial governments have been informed of the situation. Diplomatic Corps is standing by for formal negotiations. Engineering teams are prepared to begin infrastructure reconstruction in liberated systems. Rodriguez paused. Admiral, what happens if they refuse? Chen's expression grew cold as vacuum. Then we show them why Earth took 10 million years to produce a sapient species. And we make sure the lesson is remembered by anyone who might consider following their example. Across the Krek's fleet, Supreme Admiral Zarthek stared at tactical displays showing the complete encirclement of his forces. For the first time in his career, he faced an enemy that wasn't just stronger. They were operating on a level of strategic thinking that made his proudest victories look like children playing with toy soldiers. The humans hadn't just defeated the Krek's Imperium. They had demonstrated that the Imperium had never been anything more than the largest predator in a pond that was about to be drained by forces beyond their comprehension. He had 1 hour to decide whether the Kreks would evolve or become extinct. The countdown timer continued its remorseless advance, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another, where mercy was more terrifying than conquest, and the greatest warriors were those who chose not to fight.